always thought I was good at judging people. At 26, I had a good job as a campaign manager at a marketing company, and I had lived in the city long enough to know who to trust and who to watch out for. But life in the city could be lonely, and although I liked my job, sometimes I missed the close friendships I had growing up. So when I met Josefina, a new person at the company, I was glad to find someone I got along with so well. Josefina was friendly and outgoing. She was petite with curly brown hair, and always had a bright smile that made everyone like her. We quickly became friends. We started having lunch together, laughing at silly jokes, and soon we were hanging out almost every night after work. We would go shopping, watch movies, or just talk for hours while having coffee. "I feel like we've known each other forever," Josefina said one night while we were sitting in my living room drinking wine. "I feel the same way," I said, smiling. "It's nice to have someone I can be myself with." Josefina nodded, her eyes gleaming. "You're like a sister to me," she said. It felt good to have a close friend again, someone to share things with. I felt like I had found the friend I'd been missing. After a few months, I started to notice little things that didn't seem right. One day, I couldn't find my favorite necklace, a silver pendant that my mother had given me. I was sure I had left it on my bedside table, but it was gone. On another occasion, I found a coffee cup in the sink that I didn't remember using. I thought maybe I was just being forgetful, especially since work had been really busy lately. But then I started to feel like someone was watching me. It was an unsettling feeling that crept over me when I was alone in my apartment, especially at night. Sometimes, when I walked home, I thought I heard faint footsteps behind me, but when I turned around, no one was there. I told myself I was just being paranoid because of the work stress. One night, after a late shift, I came home and smelled my perfume in the air. I knew I hadn't used it that morning. My hand trembled as I set down my bag. I checked the apartment, my heart racing, but everything seemed normal. The door had been locked when I came in and the windows were closed. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself I was being silly. A few days later, Josefina and I were having lunch. As we sat in our usual cafe, Josefina showed me her phone, smiling. "Look at this old photo of us. Do you remember that day in the park?" I looked at the photo and felt a chill. It was a picture of me sitting on a bench in the park, smiling at the camera. The strange thing was, I didn't remember Josefina being there that day. I was sure I had been alone. "Josefina, when did you take this?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh, a few weeks ago," she said. "I saw you there and thought it would be fun to take a picture." She smiled, but there was something in her eyes I couldn't figure out. I forced a smile, handing her the phone back. Right, I must have forgotten. Inside, I was worried. Why didn't I remember seeing Josefina? Had she been following me? The thought unsettled me, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. After all, Josefina was my friend. But the feeling that something was wrong didn't go away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Then my phone vibrated on the nightstand. I picked it up and saw it was an unknown number. Confused, I answered. "Hello?" There was no response, just silence. Then a soft sound like someone breathing. "Hello?" I said again, louder. The call ended. I stared at the phone, feeling more confused. I told myself it was probably just a wrong number. I put the phone down and tried to sleep. The next night it happened again, then again the night after. The same unknown number, the same silence on the other end. Each time my heart raced faster. I started turning my phone off at night, hoping the calls would stop, but they didn't. One day I came home from work and found my apartment door slightly open. I knew I had locked it that morning. Panic surged through me and I hesitated before going inside. The living room looked normal. Nothing seemed out of place. But in my bedroom, the closet door was open, and my clothes were scattered as if someone had gone through them. The drawer in my nightstand was also open, and the things inside were moved around. I felt scared. My personal space had been violated. I called the police. They came and searched the apartment, but they didn't find any signs of forced entry or anything missing. They said it was probably nothing. Maybe I had left the door open or it was a prank by a neighbor. "Change your locks just to be safe," the officer said, "and if anything else happens, let us know." I nodded, feeling watched and vulnerable. I decided to change the locks the next day. The calls continued even after I changed my number. They came at all hours and new numbers appeared each time I blocked one. The silence on the other end was the worst, like someone was there watching, waiting. I became paranoid. I didn't want to go out or be alone. I stopped talking to everyone, even Josefina, whose messages I started to ignore. I felt like I was losing my mind. One night there was a knock on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Josefina standing there, looking worried. "Can we talk?" Josefina called. I hesitated, then opened the door. Josefina stepped inside, looking around. "You haven't been answering my messages," Josefina said, concerned. "I've been busy," I said, my voice tense. "A lot has been going on." "You look tired. Are you okay?" "You can tell me anything," Josefina said, stepping closer. Something in her voice set off alarms in my mind. "Why are you really here, Josefina?" I asked, stepping back a little. "I just want to help you," she said, her eyes intense. "You've been distant. I'm worried about you." "How did you get into my apartment before, Josefina, when my things were moved?" I asked. "I was just looking out for you," she said calmly. "I didn't want to scare you." I felt trapped, my heart pounding. "Have you been following me, making those calls, taking pictures?" Josefina took another step closer. "I've always been there for you. I just wanted to be your friend, to protect you. You need me." "Get out," I said, my voice trembling, reaching for my phone. "Get out." Josefina looked hurt. "You don't understand, I care about you." "Get out," I shouted, tears streaming down my face, "or I'll call the police." Josefina stood still for a moment, then slowly turned and walked out the door. I slammed it shut behind her, locked it, and sank to the floor crying. I changed my locks again and installed a security system. I filed a police report, showing them the calls and photos. They issued a restraining order against Josefina. I hoped it would be enough. Days passed, but I could barely sleep. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. One night I received a package at my door with no return address. With trembling hands, I opened it and found a small teddy bear with a note. "I'll always be here watching you." My heart raced. Josefina had been more than just a friend. She had been a shadow lurking in the background of my life, and as I looked around my empty apartment, I realized that trusting someone could be the scariest thing of all. I'm going to give you some background before I describe the incident. I was 15 years old at the time, in the fall of 2006. About 11 months before this incident, I had moved from the Dominican Republic to the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. People always told me that I looked much older than I really was. Some even mistook me for someone 20 years old. It was probably due to the scars on my face, plus the fact that I was bald at 15 and stood at 1.76 meters at the time. Anyway, I had moved to one of the worst neighborhoods in Milwaukee. While living there, I would always hear gunshots from time to time, as well as arguments. But I never felt that my life was in real danger until this incident happened. I remember it was in early November, so it was pretty cold, especially in the Midwest. My mom sent me walking to the liquor store and grocery store in the middle of the night, around 9 p.m., so I could buy some snacks and food for the next day since she wouldn't be home. She gave me $25 and her food stamp card. You're probably wondering why my mom would send me to a liquor store in the middle of the night. Well, my mom got drunk quite a lot, and she gets drunk very easily, so she probably didn't care at the time. I lived about 9 blocks from the aforementioned liquor store, so I was on my way there, and it would take me about 10 minutes to get there. I felt pretty unsafe because I had a lot of cash on me, and I didn't want to get robbed since it was a violent area. I also forgot to mention that I didn't speak English well at all. I had been learning English for about 4 months, so I could answer questions, but it would be pretty hard for an English speaker to understand what I was saying. Anyway, when I walked into the liquor store, I realized it was basically empty except for 2 other teenagers around my age. They were talking to each other, and when they heard the door open, they looked at me in less than a second. They gave me a look, and right away I felt like they wanted to rob me. I'll describe how they were dressed and what they looked like. I walked towards the small aisle where they were, and they didn't say a word to me, just stared. But I could see them watching me through my peripheral vision. Teenager number 1, who was glaring at me with more hostility, was an African-American young man who looked about 15 years old. He was wearing worn-out Timberlands, baggy blue jeans, a simple white t-shirt, and an orange jacket with no logos. He also had a small afro. He looked to be about 1.63 meters, so I felt like I could easily take him down if it came to that. Teenager number 2, who was also staring at me, looked about 17. He was also African-American, wearing black Adidas or baggy pants and a black Iverson t-shirt with a white shirt underneath. He had one of those 90s hairstyles with a high fade. This teenager was my height, maybe a centimeter and a half taller, but he also looked taller because of his hairstyle. When I shop for something, I usually take my time, and on this occasion, it took me about 3 to 4 minutes in that small store. I had $25 on me, so I was going to buy a lot of snacks for the night. At that moment, I thought they were going to leave, but they were still there, not looking for anything. I had to walk down the same aisle they were in. I glanced at the liquor store clerk, but he wasn't paying attention to anything going on. I walked down the aisle and opened the fridge, and just when I was about to open it, they whispered quietly, "Give me your money." I understood what they said, even though my English wasn't that good. So I responded by saying, "Sorry, I don't have money," and it seemed like they didn't understand what I was trying to say to them at the moment, probably because my English wasn't great. Then I took out my drink, and teenager number 2 whispered in an angry tone, I said, "Give me your damn money." At that moment, I was pretty terrified as the clerk wasn't paying attention to what was happening. He seemed dead to the world. There were 2 teenagers in the store for 20 minutes, and the clerk didn't seem concerned or confused in the least. I took a few steps back, and they stayed there with angry expressions on their faces. It might sound funny to you, but at that moment, they looked like they could kill me at any second. The angry, lifeless stare they gave me was one of the most unsettling moments I've ever witnessed, and I've seen some really bad things. I decided to drop my snacks and leave the store. As I walked out, they kept staring at me. However, this time they were clasping their hands as if they were praying. At that moment, I started walking quickly down the sidewalk and decided to head to the nearby grocery store, which I remember was about 4 or 5 blocks away. I kept looking behind me, afraid that they might be following me. That's when I decided to take a shortcut through a very dirty alley, one of the dumbest decisions I've ever made. While walking through that smelly alley, I heard someone shout, "We're going to kill you, you damn." I had no idea at the time what they were trying to say, but from the tone, I knew they had said something terrible. In those 3 seconds of silence, I looked back, and it was the same teenagers from before. They were standing about 20.5 meters away from me, and I'm not lying when I say this. The shorter teenager pulled out a gun and fired 2 shots at me. At that exact moment, I felt adrenaline rush through me, and I started running as fast as I could. I could hear them running behind me, but they didn't fire any more shots. I ran as fast as I've ever run in my life because I felt they had a good chance of catching up to me. I was athletic, but they were young too, and they could have possibly caught me. I ran and entered a nearby Popeyes, which was less than 8 blocks away. I ran inside, and people were staring at me, but I didn't care. I rushed into the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and sat on the toilet, trying to comprehend what had just happened at that moment. I think when I left the liquor store, they left too, but they didn't make it obvious. They could have shot me in the back without me even noticing them. I stayed in that bathroom for about 30 minutes, waiting to hear if they would find me inside the restaurant too. I came out of the bathroom, and the cashier was looking at me with a confused expression and then asked if I was okay. My stupid self told her that, yes, I was fine. Now I know that wasn't a good answer, and it was a really dumb moment on my part. When I left Popeyes, I ran near an alley and tried to find a bike to get home faster. I found a bike, got on it, and pedaled as fast as I could until I got home. Once I got home, I acted as normal and casual as possible. My mom, in her drunken voice, asked where the food was, and I simply told her the store was closed, so I couldn't buy anything. I went to my room and wondered if I should tell the police or my mom what had happened to me. I didn't want to tell my mom because she would worry, and I definitely didn't want to be involved with or have anything to do with the police. I kept going to that store, but only during the day. But looking around, I never saw those same teenagers again. I also decided to throw away the cap I was wearing that day because I didn't want to be easily recognized, though they could easily recognize me by my face. About 7 months after the incident, I moved out of that house and relocated to a different area of Milwaukee. 14 years have passed, and I haven't seen those same guys again, and I'm very glad I haven't. I don't know why they wanted to kill me, but I'm glad I made it out alive. I moved away from Milwaukee, and now I can speak English well. The sad thing is that Milwaukee has become much more violent. I'm 30 years old now, and I'm truly grateful that none of those bullets hit me. If you have any more questions about the story, feel free to ask in the comments. Stay safe out there, everyone. This was my first experience with this kind of situation. In conclusion, after all these years, I've realized how lucky I was that night. Even though Milwaukee has remained a tough place to live, I managed to move on and leave that life behind. Sometimes I wonder what happened to those guys, but I try not to think about it too much. I just hope they didn't continue down the same path of violence. What I do know is that experience taught me to be more careful and aware of my surroundings. It's been many years since that incident, but every time I think about what could have happened, I feel grateful for having made the right choices. Even if some were instinctive or purely out of luck. I can't emphasize enough the importance of always being alert, especially in areas where violence is common. Since I moved, I've tried to share my story with those who might be in similar situations, hoping they can learn something from my experience. It's easy to think that something like that will never happen to you, but the reality is that violence can touch anyone at any time. I hope those who read this story understand how crucial it is to stay safe and make smart decisions in dangerous situations. I'm thankful I left Milwaukee and was able to rebuild my life in a safer place. And although the memory of that night will never completely disappear, it has been a valuable lesson that has shaped me to be more conscious and prepared for whatever life may bring. Thanks for reading my story, and I hope it serves as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's always a way to move forward. I never thought something like this could happen to me, much less to me. These things seem straight out of movies, stories you hear and think only happen to others. I just wanted to work, do well, and go back home, but I found myself trapped in a nightmare that seemed endless. It wasn't just a job, it was my life. It was my daily routine, my livelihood, what gave me security. But all of that slowly started to crumble, like a house of cards falling at the slightest breeze. It took me so long to realize what was happening, and by the time I did, it was already too late. From the very first day at the office, I felt excited. It was a job I had been searching for months, and I felt like I was finally in a place where I could grow. The office was modern, bright, full of young and talented people. There was a positive energy in the air, something that made me feel like I belonged there. Don Roberto, my boss, was the kind of person who makes you feel welcome, always with a smile, always with a kind comment. He seemed trustworthy, a natural leader. But now, looking back, I realized there was something in his eyes, something I couldn't see at the time, something dark and disturbing hiding behind that kind smile. It all started subtly, so subtle that it made me doubt my own instincts. Meetings were routine, necessary, and there was nothing strange about him calling me into his office to review reports or discuss projects. But one day I noticed his eyes didn't leave me. It wasn't the typical look of a boss listening to his employee. It was something more. He sat too close, his leg brushing against mine under the table. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried not to think much of it. It's just an accident, I told myself. However, every time I tried to move away, he would move closer, invading my space in a way that felt intentional. In one of those meetings, something happened that I can't forget. We were reviewing a project, and suddenly, he got up from his chair and stood behind me. He started explaining something, pointing at the screen on my computer, but his hands rested on my shoulders, pressing them lightly. It was a soft touch, but full of intention. I could feel his breath on my neck, and my skin instantly crawled. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought he could hear it. I couldn't focus on anything he was saying. I was just thinking about how to get out of there without causing a scene. When he finally pulled away, I couldn't breathe until I was out of that office. The following days became a sick game of manipulation. Every morning I found flowers on my desk. Red roses, always red, with cards that had increasingly personal messages. You're the reason I smile. I need you close to me. I started to feel like those flowers weren't just a kind gesture, but a trap slowly closing around me. Sometimes I would find myself looking around, hoping someone would say something, comment on how inappropriate the situation was. But the glances I got from my coworkers were fleeting, filled with discomfort and silence. No one wanted to get involved. I was completely alone. One afternoon, while I was focused on my work, I felt someone standing behind me. I turned and saw him, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He offered me a gift wrapped in an elegant box. Inside was a designer watch, one that cost more than I could earn in months. I tried to refuse it, told him I couldn't accept something like that, but his expression changed instantly. His eyes hardened and his voice, which had been soft until then, turned sharp. "I don't want to hear you say no to something I give you again," he said, not breaking eye contact. I felt a lump in my throat, a mix of fear and disgust. I put the watch in my drawer, not knowing what else to do. I wanted to cry, scream, but I just stood there, paralyzed, while he walked away with that fake smile. From that day on, his behavior became more aggressive, more invasive. The late-night emails started, always after working hours, always with that ambiguous tone that made me feel guilty for not responding the way he expected. "I'd like to take you out to dinner, talk about more relaxed things," one of them said. I ignored it, trying to maintain distance, but he persisted. One night, I got a message that left no room for doubt. "I don't understand why you refuse to spend time with me. It's not good to have your boss upset." That last line chilled me to the bone. It was a threat disguised as an invitation. And for the first time, I felt real terror at what he might do to me. The meetings in his office became torture. Every time I walked in, he would slam the door shut and move in too close. On one occasion, while trying to explain something about a project, he grabbed my hand, squeezing it hard. "I don't understand why you're doing this to yourself," he whispered as his fingers slid down my wrist. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I pulled away abruptly, making up an excuse to leave, but I knew this wasn't going to stop. One morning, I arrived at the office early, hoping to work in peace before he got there. I felt like I was on the verge of a breakdown. My nerves were shot, and I didn't know how much more I could take. While I was at my desk, I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up and saw him standing at the door, staring at me with that predatory expression I had memorized. He walked over without saying a word and sat on the edge of my desk, crossing his arms. "You know I care about you, right?" he said in a tone that was meant to sound tender but only made me feel nauseous. "I don't want to have to fire you, but you need to understand that some things are non-negotiable." His hand slid towards my neck again, like in that first meeting, but this time his grip was firmer, more determined. I felt absolute panic, a paralyzing fear that made me tremble from head to toe. I forced myself not to cry, not to show him the fear that was eating me alive inside. With all my strength, I pushed him away and stood up, almost knocking over my chair in the process. I ran out of the office without looking back, my legs shaking and my vision blurred from the tears I refused to let fall. I couldn't believe this was happening. I couldn't understand how I had ended up in this situation. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to every sound in my house as if someone was about to break in. Every shadow felt like a threat, every noise a premonition of what could happen to me. I knew I couldn't go on like this, but I didn't see a way out. Speaking up meant losing my job, my only source of income, but staying silent meant allowing him to keep hurting me. I felt trapped, like a mouse in a trap, not knowing where to run. Finally, after many sleepless nights and silent tears, I decided I wasn't going to be his victim anymore. I bought a small microphone, barely visible, that I could hide in my clothes without him noticing. I started recording everything, every conversation, every comment, every time he got too close. The recordings gave me a sense of control, of having a weapon in this silent war he had started. Listening to his voice on those recordings over and over was like reliving those moments, but this time with the certainty that I wasn't crazy, that everything that had happened was real. The evidence piled up quickly. There were entire nights of recordings where he harassed me, threatened me, and it became clear that everything I had been going through wasn't in my imagination. One time, while listening to one of the recordings, I had to stop because the panic overwhelmed me. It was his voice, so close, so clear, telling me I didn't know who I was messing with. I ran to the bathroom and vomited. I had never felt so much fear, nor so much pent-up rage. Finally, with all the evidence in my hands, I decided it was time to act. I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the police with the recordings. Filing the complaint was one of the scariest moments of my life. I had to recount every detail, relive every moment in front of strangers who looked at me with a mix of disbelief and pity. Some officers asked me questions that made me feel even more vulnerable, as if they were doubting my word. But I had the evidence, and I wasn't going to let him win. The trial was pure hell. Having to relive each of those moments in front of strangers, having to see him sitting there with that calm look and that contemptuous smile was devastating. But the recordings spoke for themselves. His threats, his insinuations, everything was exposed. When they finally sentenced him, I felt a mix of relief and emptiness. 5 years in prison and $10,000 in compensation. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was proof that my voice had been heard. Now every time I think of those flowers, those gifts, his voice whispering in my ear, I know that those scars will stay with me for a long time. But at least I can say I didn't stay silent. I fought, and though it cost me, I survived. I just hope my story encourages other women not to stay silent. Because if I could face him, I know others can too. I have a very serious problem, and I don't know how to handle it. I'm at a point where I no longer feel safe in my own home, in my own life, and I need help. It all started in a strange, almost insignificant way, but now it's something that consumes me day and night. I never thought I could be living through something like this, but here I am, constantly afraid and not knowing what to do. Please, I need someone to listen and give me some advice because this has gotten out of control. It was an ordinary night like any other. I had a long day at work and came home wanting to relax. I live in a small house in a quiet neighborhood, a place where everyone knows each other and nothing strange ever happens. I set my bag on the table and took off my shoes, feeling the relief of finally being home. Just as I was about to close the door, I saw something on the ground on the doormat. It was a plain white envelope with nothing written on it. I don't know why, but I had a bad feeling. I picked it up and opened it, expecting it to be an ad or something unimportant. Inside, there was a handwritten letter in handwriting I didn't recognize. The message was short, something like, "You are beautiful even when you don't know it." I stared at those words, unable to understand who they could be from. There was no signature, no name, nothing to indicate who had left the letter. I thought maybe it was a bad joke from a neighbor or even a mistake, so I left it on the table and tried not to think much of it. But I couldn't shake it from my mind. That night, I went to bed with an odd feeling, a mix of discomfort and confusion. Days passed and I tried to forget it, but a week later I found another envelope at the door. This time the letter was longer and more personal. It said things like, "I see you every day and every move you make is perfect." I felt a chill down my spine. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Who was leaving these letters? Were they watching me? I had no idea what to think. It was as if someone was observing me and writing down their thoughts for me to read. I became paranoid. I started checking my social media, trying to remember if I had posted anything that might have caught someone's attention, but I found nothing unusual. The letters kept coming. Sometimes they were just sweet words, other times they were more sinister, as if the person writing them was getting closer to me, more certain they knew everything about my life. I got so scared that I stopped going out at night and started looking out the window every time I heard a noise. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, thinking about who could be behind all this. One day when I got home from work, I found something that made me feel a fear I had never experienced before. It wasn't just a letter this time. There was a small package wrapped in bright red paper, with a black ribbon perfectly tied. I picked it up with trembling hands and brought it inside. When I opened it, I found a silver necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. Inside the box was a note that said, "So you can always feel me close, even when I'm not there." I felt sick. This was no longer just a series of letters. Someone had left a gift at my door, and that made it so much more real and terrifying. I started wondering if someone in my neighborhood was doing this. A neighbor with a sick obsession. I tried to remember if I had seen anyone new, anyone who had looked at me a bit too long, but I couldn't think of anyone. I had no proof, no idea who could be behind all this, and it was driving me crazy. Weeks went by and the letters kept coming, each one more personal than the last. I began to notice that the messages included details about my daily life that no one should know. They said things like, "I know you like to wear that blue dress on Thursdays," or, "I saw how you fell asleep on the couch last night." I felt like someone was watching me every moment, and I had no idea how they were doing it without me noticing. I checked every window, every corner of my house, but I found nothing. It was as if this person had access to my life in a way I couldn't understand. One night I found another letter at the door, but this time it didn't come alone. There was a picture of me inside. It was a photo taken from a distance of me walking towards my car. It wasn't a casual photo, it was clearly intentional. Someone had followed me and photographed me without my knowledge. I felt like my privacy had been violated in the worst possible way. I called Laura, my best friend, and told her everything. She said I should go to the police, that this was no longer normal, but I wasn't sure. I was afraid they wouldn't take me seriously, that they'd think I was overreacting. Finally, I decided to go to the police with everything I had: the letters, the photos, the gifts. The officers listened to me, took notes, but told me that without a direct threat or identity, there was little they could do. They recommended installing security cameras and staying alert. I left the station feeling more vulnerable than ever. There was no one who could really help me. I was alone in this. I installed cameras around my house, hoping it would deter my stalker, but it didn't. The letters kept coming. Sometimes the cameras caught shadows or quick movements, but never enough to identify anyone. It was as if this person knew exactly where the cameras were and how to avoid them. I started feeling like my own home was a prison. I slept with a kitchen knife by my bed and checked every room before going to sleep. I couldn't keep living like this. One early morning, I woke up to a loud noise on the porch. My heart raced. I grabbed the knife and walked slowly to the door, trying not to make a sound. I looked through the peephole, but I didn't see anyone. However, on the ground was another envelope, larger than the previous ones. I picked it up with fear and opened it right there, my hands shaking. Inside, I found photos of me sleeping in my own bed, taken from different angles. How had they gotten inside? How was it possible that someone had been in my house without me knowing? I checked all the windows and doors. Everything was locked and secured. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch holding the knife, waiting for something else to happen. The following days were hell. I jumped at every noise, checked my house from top to bottom, looking for any sign that someone had been there. But there was nothing. The letters kept coming, and each one became more threatening. They were no longer just words of sick love. Now they said things like, "You can't hide from me, and if I can't have you, no one else will." I felt like I was losing my mind. I was afraid to leave, but also afraid to stay home. I started working from home, thinking at least I wouldn't be followed, but it was worse. One day, while working on my computer, I received an email from an unknown address. The subject line said, "You look beautiful today." When I opened it, I found photos of me taken that very day from my window, as if someone had been right outside, watching me. I closed the curtains immediately and called Laura, crying. She came as quickly as she could and stayed with me that night. I couldn't bear to be alone, but even with her there, I didn't feel safe. I was terrified by the idea that someone could be so close, so aware of my every move. That night, around 3 a.m, someone knocked softly on the window. We both froze. We didn't want to move. The shadow of a figure loomed through the curtain, moving slowly. Laura grabbed her phone and called the police while I held the knife in both hands, trembling. The minutes felt like hours until finally the figure moved away and the police arrived. They searched the area but found nothing. They told me it was most likely a stalker who had become more brazen, but without evidence they could only keep an eye on the area and wait for them to make a mistake. I couldn't believe it. I was dealing with a ghost, someone who was playing with my mind and my fears without leaving a trace. The next day, I decided to move temporarily to my parents' house. I thought maybe the distance would give me some peace, but it didn't. Even there, the letters started arriving. My mother found them in the mailbox, all addressed to me, all filled with increasingly direct threats. One of them said, "No matter where you go, I'll always find you." I didn't know what to do anymore. My parents were scared, my friends were worried, and I felt trapped in a nightmare with no way out. I started to fear that not only would they harm me, but also the people around me. I felt guilty for putting them in danger. The breaking point came one night when I returned to my house after being away for a month. I decided to face my fear and go back, thinking maybe everything had calmed down. But when I opened the door, I found all the walls covered in photos of me. Pictures from my childhood, of intimate moments I thought were forgotten. Some were of recent events, others from years ago, as if this person had been following me my entire life. There were notes written on each of them: "You are mine. Together forever. Don't resist." I ran out of the house and called the police, desperate. This time, they took the case much more seriously. They assigned constant surveillance to my house and began a thorough investigation. They discovered that someone had been entering through a basement window I never used. They found footprints, but still didn't have enough evidence to identify the culprit. Now I live with the constant anxiety that they'll reappear. I can't trust anyone, not even my own shadow. I'm afraid of every person who crosses my path, every message, every knock on the door. I'm asking for advice because I really don't know what to do. This has crossed all boundaries, and I'm scared that one day they'll hurt me or someone close to me. If anyone has experience with something similar, please tell me what I can do. I need answers before it's too late. I never thought something like this could happen to me, especially not when I was only 13 years old. You grow up believing that your life is safe, that your home is your refuge, and that no one can hurt you in your own neighborhood. I lived in a small town in the United States, the typical quiet place where everyone knows each other, the neighbors greet you, and nothing strange ever seems to happen. But everything changed, and what used to be my safe zone became a place that terrified me. Now 10 years later, I finally discovered who was responsible for that terror, and although I can't do anything about it now, at least I know I wasn't crazy. It all started so insignificantly that, at first, I didn't even notice. My life was normal. I went to school, came home, and spent the afternoons playing in the park or chatting with my friends. I loved sitting on the swings, feeling the breeze on my face while looking at the sky, imagining that everything would always be so simple. But then things started happening that I couldn't ignore. Little details, things that seemed like coincidences, but little by little turned into my worst nightmare. I remember perfectly the day I found the first note. I had had a normal day at school, and when I got home and checked my backpack, I found a carefully folded piece of paper. I thought maybe a friend had left a silly message, some harmless joke. But when I opened it, I found something that made me stop in my tracks. "You look beautiful in that blue shirt." My skin crawled instantly. That day I had worn my favorite shirt, one I only wore on special occasions. I didn't understand how someone knew I had worn it, and worse yet, how that note had gotten into my backpack. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence, that maybe a friend had wanted to play a joke on me. I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I didn't tell anyone. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about that sentence. Every time I wore that shirt, I felt like someone was watching me. I started doubting everything and everyone. Every time I went to school or walked home, I felt a constant gaze behind me. I would turn around quickly, expecting to see someone, but no one was ever there. It was as if I were being watched by a ghost. Weeks went by, and although I tried to continue with my normal life, things got worse. One afternoon, while walking home, I felt like someone was following me. I quickened my pace, but the sound of hurried footsteps echoed behind me. My heart pounded, and when I finally dared to turn around, there was no one there. I tried to laugh it off, thinking it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I started taking different routes, trying to lose that presence I couldn't see, but the feeling was always there. It didn't take long before the messages started arriving on my phone. They came from unknown numbers, and at first they were short, almost innocent greetings like, "Hey, how are you?" But soon they became more personal. "How was your day, Julia?" one said. Another read, "I saw you stayed late at the library today." That one hit me the hardest because that day I had indeed been at the library late, studying for an exam. No one but my close friends knew that. I began to feel like I had no control over my own life. The first thing I did was block the numbers, but a new one would always pop up. Every time I thought I had gotten rid of my stalker, they came back, like a persistent shadow I couldn't shake. I didn't know who to turn to. My parents had always been strict about phone and social media use, and I was afraid that if I told them, they'd get mad at me or worse, blame me for not having told them earlier. I tried to handle it on my own, but every message felt like a stab, reminding me that someone was too close. One afternoon, returning home after school, I found a letter in my mailbox. There was no return address, just my name written by hand. I felt a chill as I saw it. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, the message was short but terrifying enough to paralyze me. "I've been following you for a while. Don't be afraid, I just want to protect you." It was as if someone was playing with my mind, trying to make me believe they were looking out for me. But everything about those words told me I was in danger. That night was one of the worst of my life. I stayed in bed with the covers pulled over my head, listening to every little sound in the house. Every creak of the floor, every tap of the branches against the window seemed like a sign that someone was outside, stalking me. I closed the curtains, but I still felt like there were eyes piercing through the fabric, watching me even in the dark. My mind wouldn't stop imagining who could be behind all of this. I thought about my classmates, the neighbors, even family friends, but none of them fit. I felt like I was going crazy. The next few days were a nightmare. The letters began arriving more frequently and the messages became more insistent. They sent me photos of the places I frequented, the town square, the park, the bus stop. One afternoon, I found a picture of my own house taken from across the street. My heart stopped. Not only were they following me, but they were also watching my home, my refuge. I started to fear leaving the house, and at the same time, I feared staying inside. There was no safe place for me. One afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore and told everything to my best friend, Carla. We sat in the park, and between sobs, I explained every detail, every message, every letter. She listened, and for a moment, I felt less alone. She told me I had to tell my parents that I couldn't handle this on my own, but I was scared of how they would react. I didn't want to worry them, and I didn't want them to think I couldn't take care of myself. Carla supported me and promised to always be there for me, but even her presence wasn't enough to take away that constant fear. The terror became even more real when, while we were walking together toward my house one afternoon, I received a message that said, "Carla won't protect you from me, only I can." We both froze. I felt like the world was collapsing around me. Not only did they know everything about me, but they also knew who I was with and what I was doing at every moment. It wasn't just a sick game anymore. It was a real threat that was becoming more and more dangerous. Carla insisted we go to the police, but I didn't know what to tell them. What proof did I have? A few unsigned letters, some messages from constantly changing numbers? How was I going to prove it wasn't just a bad joke? Finally, after many sleepless nights, I gathered the courage to tell my parents. I remember the look on their faces when I showed them the letters and messages. My mom was speechless, and my dad started checking all the locks in the house, as if suddenly everything could be fixed by securing the doors. We went to the police together, and although I filed a report, there wasn't much they could do without a clear suspect. They told us to stay alert, to report anything strange, but I knew that wasn't enough. My stalker always seemed to know everything about me and was always one step ahead. My dad installed new locks, security cameras, but none of that changed the feeling of being watched. I tried to go on with my life. I changed my routes to school, stopped going out alone, and avoided staying late anywhere. But none of that stopped the harassment. One afternoon, when I returned from school, I found a small box at my door. When I opened it, I discovered a picture of me as a child, an image only my family had. On the back was a message: "You've always been mine, Julia." I didn't understand how they had gotten that photo, but what terrified me most was that someone had access to something so personal. From that moment on, my life became hell. Every time I left the house, I looked around, expecting to see someone suspicious. I avoided the windows, closed all the curtains, and made sure every door was locked. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always there, in the dark, watching me. I tried going back to the police with the new evidence, but they always told me the same thing. Without concrete proof, there wasn't much they could do. As the years passed, the harassment gradually subsided. The messages became less frequent, and the letters finally stopped arriving. I don't know if it was because they got bored or found another victim, but I felt like I could finally start breathing again. I graduated from school, moved to another city for college, and began to rebuild my life. But the fear never completely went away. Every time someone got too close or stared at me for too long, my mind went back to those years of terror. 10 years later, I had managed to leave all that behind, or so I thought. One day, I returned to my old neighborhood to visit my parents. Everything looked the same houses, the same streets, but something felt different. As I walked toward my house, I saw a man coming out of the house next door. He stared at me, and for a second I felt a chill. There was something in his gaze, in the way he watched me, that felt familiar. I didn't know why, but it scared me in a way I hadn't felt in years. My parents weren't home, so I waited outside. I decided to go through some of my old things in the garage, and among boxes of memories, I found one with all the letters and gifts I had received during those years. That's when I saw something that took my breath away. On one of the letters, there was an almost imperceptible signature, a scribble I had never noticed before. It was the same signature I had seen on a note that neighbor had left for my parents years ago. Suddenly, everything clicked. That man, my lifelong neighbor, had been watching me for years. He lived next door, knowing every detail of my life, every move, every step I took. I wanted to confront him, scream, demand explanations, but fear paralyzed me. Years of harassment, years of not knowing who was behind it all, and now I knew he had been just a few meters away from me all that time. I couldn't do anything. It was too late. Without proof, without a confession, there was no justice for what he had done to me. The only thing I have left is the certainty that I wasn't crazy, that it was all real, and that I managed to get away from him. But the fear remains, dormant, and every time I see a shadow or someone looks at me for too long, I feel like it could all start again. I'm a fairly unremarkable man in my 20s with a stable job and a happy family. Being that way, I never considered the idea that one day I could become the target of a stalker. So here's my story as a warning to everyone. You don't have to be a typical young, attractive woman to attract the attention of a stalker. I don't know if this makes sense, but I'm a regular, although very casual, Facebook user. I don't post much, but I check my newsfeed frequently. One Saturday night, I was scrolling through Facebook before going to bed when I received a friend request. I accepted it without a second thought. I accept almost all friend requests because I never post anything too personal. As I said, I have a very casual approach to social media. I took a quick glance at the profile of the person who had sent the request and saw it was obviously a fake account. I didn't give it much importance, put my computer away, and went to sleep. The next day, I was having lunch at a friend's house and had completely forgotten about the friend request from the night before. My phone buzzed, and I saw that I had received a message from a coworker, Mara. Although Mara and I worked together and had some mutual friends outside of work, we didn't communicate much except when it was about work. I checked it, assuming it was work-related. I guess looking back, you could say I checked it to understand what was going on. The Facebook account that had added me had also added Mara, and had bombarded her with insults and accusations, calling her a whore, a bitch, and every imaginable insult. The person went a step further and sent a message to Mara's husband, accusing her of cheating on him with a coworker. Mara wanted to know if I knew who this person was because I was the only other person who had accepted the friend request. I explained that I accept all requests and had no idea who it was. I then proceeded to remove the account in question from my friends. Mara explained that she already had suspicions about who it was but just wanted to see if I could confirm it. She believed it was Carla. Let's rewind a few weeks. I had received a friend request from Carla. I found it strange because although we worked in the same place, we had never met, never spoken, not even made eye contact or been within 6 meters of each other. We worked in different departments, but I passed by her area every day because I had to cross her department to get to our break room. That was the extent of our interactions. I only learned her name when she sent me the friend request on Facebook and I recognized her photo. I'm not sure how she knew my name. Carla also added my wife on Facebook and subsequently began scrolling through years of my wife's posts and photos, liking and commenting on several of them. She also started interacting with my posts as if she knew us. However, at work, I continued passing by as usual, and there was still no interaction. It seemed weird to me, but I didn't think much of it. Back to the present. The mysterious Facebook account continued harassing Mara until she told them she knew it was Carla and was going to call the police. I thought that would be the end of it, but boy, was I wrong. Over the next few weeks, I started receiving more friend requests from girls who wanted to have sex with me. Obviously, I knew they were fake and mostly ignored them. I also started receiving notifications from Google and Facebook about suspicious activity on my profile. Most of the time, they were warnings about failed login attempts. I specifically remember one notification saying that my Facebook account had been logged into from an unusual location and asking if it was me. It wasn't me, and I should have been more concerned. But for some reason, I didn't care at the time. I was stupid, and even after that, I didn't bother to change my password. At the time, I saw all these incidents as isolated and random. I didn't have any valuable information on my account, no private or secret messages. What harm could they do, right? Months passed, and one day my wife received a message from Carla saying she had bought a high-end video camera and wanted to start doing amateur filming. She asked if we could help her by allowing her to film our family for a day. Remembering what Mara had said a few months earlier, I was hesitant, but I wanted to give Carla the benefit of the doubt. So we agreed to tell her we'd schedule it when we weren't busy, and we left it at that. Once again, I had still not met Carla in person. A few more weeks passed, and we completely forgot to schedule the filming when Carla messaged me about it. I declined. That's when things got weird. She sent me several gifs of stick figures making sexually suggestive moves. I didn't respond, and she asked, "Funny, right?" I immediately messaged my wife to check my Facebook profile and see the messages. Not wanting to be rude, I agreed with Carla, acting as if the humor in the gifs was funny, and continued the conversation. Then she sent me old photos from my abandoned MySpace account, which I had completely forgotten about. That was around the time MySpace had been revamped, and many people lost valuable memories. Somehow she had found mine and decided to share them with me. I found it creepy. Things escalated quickly from there. She started talking about her body and how she wasn't attractive, trying to get me to compliment her. She wasn't beautiful, but she was an attractive person. I didn't fall for the bait. Then she hit me with something completely unexpected. She asked about my penis, calling it vergota, and suggesting it was probably big. I decided that was enough and stopped responding. Of course, my wife was reading along the whole time, and we were texting each other about how funny and weird the whole thing was. I continued going to work, and still, I never met Carla in person. I especially didn't want to have any conversation after that. Carla sent me one final message asking for a favor. Mara had blocked her profile, and Carla suspected that Mara was saying bad things about her, so she wanted me to check Mara's profile to confirm it. I told her I wasn't going to spy on Mara for her, and that was the end of it. Between us, I checked the profile, and Mara wasn't wasting her time talking about Carla. Around that time, my wife received a text message from an unknown number. The person knew her name but was trying to remain anonymous while flirting with her. We were with a group of friends at the time, and we all thought it would be funny if we all responded, flirting back at the same time to mess with them. Once again, I never thought to connect any of these incidents. Eventually, Carla left the job and I never saw her again, but I kept receiving suspicious activity alerts and friend requests, which I stupidly continued to ignore. I had almost forgotten about Carla until, I'd say, more than a year later, my wife dropped a bombshell on me. A good friend of ours messaged my wife telling her that I had been sending her very inappropriate messages on Facebook. I had been busy running errands all day and hadn't checked my Facebook at that time. I discovered that my password had been changed. When I finally managed to log back in, all my messages had been deleted. I had no idea of the extent of what had happened until I started hearing from people to whom I had supposedly been sending very suggestive and disgusting messages. The problem was that these weren't random women on my friend list who were targeted. They were women close to me, good friends, my wife's sisters, my friends' wives. These messages weren't subtle. They were graphic about what I supposedly wanted to do to them. I felt completely violated and humiliated. I couldn't imagine how those women felt. My wife and I were very close to our families and friends, and about every 2 weeks or so, all our friends would gather to drink, have barbecues, watch movies or sports, and hang out. We saw several families regularly, and we never had a problem. Everyone said they understood what had happened and knew it wasn't me. Deep down, though, I could see that they felt it possibly, potentially, probably had been me. Over time, more and more of them stopped coming to the point where my house began to feel empty. I confided in my wife how I felt, that they thought it had been me, and she told me I was just being paranoid. She argued that our friends were busy with their lives and would eventually come back when they were free again. Then I found out that someone had created a Facebook account using my name and photo, and had continued harassing the same women. One of them posted a screenshot of the conversation with this fake me on Facebook. She commented that she didn't believe it was really me, but also mentioned that the person used some words I typically say. She also pointed out that the stalker knew a lot about my friends and family. My heart broke instantly when I read that. I stopped checking my Facebook for a long time, and I guess I fell into a slight depression. I felt miserable. I told my wife that I wanted to disappear and even seriously considered leaving my job of 7 years and moving away to start fresh. I now know I was being pretty irrational, and fortunately my wife remained strong for me throughout this whole ordeal. I felt like I needed to defend my honor and started gathering alibis for the times, people, and places I had been during the moments those messages were sent. My wife brutally told me that she couldn't believe I was being so weak as to let a lifeless asshole on Facebook drag me down and make me feel that way. And she was right. I've always been a very mentally strong person, and I always try to see the best in a bad situation. But for some reason, all of this affected me differently. I can't explain why, but I felt extreme shame and guilt for something I hadn't even done. Without my wife's support, which snapped me back to reality, I don't know what would have happened. We advised our friends to ignore the person, and eventually everything stopped. From time to time, I still get random friend requests, but I no longer accept them. I don't have concrete proof that all of this was Carla's doing. It all just happened during the time she injected herself into my life and stopped when she left. Our friends have started to come back, but it doesn't feel the same as it did before. I don't know if it's them or if it's just something in my head. My wife and I came to the conclusion that Carla enjoyed others' misery. After tormenting Mara, she took me as her next target, trying to ruin my marriage and distance me from my friends, with no other reason than the fact that she liked doing that. I'm sure she hasn't stopped and only left me alone because she found a new victim to stalk.